Yes, guys, welcome to another episode of the Alpha21 podcast. We are joined by a very special guest. I know I say that whenever we have a guest, but actually this week I think we are joined by a very special guest, and I'll tell you why. So today's guest is Jake Carter. Now, welcome to the podcast, Jake.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you why Jake is a very special guest. I have Jake to thank for a lot of the kind of the trajectory of where I have kind of gone with my own health and my own business as well, in terms of, the clients I serve, because I think it was like lockdown, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Lockdown?
Yeah, it was initially your mom, which
Yeah,
there was rebirth, right? Yeah.
Yeah, she was first, wasn't she? Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And then I think we connected after that. And then there was the protocol as well for Katie. And then there was the institute, obviously.
Yeah, look, I want to just quickly touch on this because I think it's really relevant. So, I'd actually followed, I'd followed you for years. I kind of followed you when you was at Frontline Fit in Manchester. I'd followed you when you kind of started to go more into the functional health side of things, and I was really interested. And I don't even know if you remember this. You probably don't, because you probably had a million of these. I don't know why you would, but I reached out to you probably 3 years prior, just because I was very interested in what you were doing, just for coaching, and a bit at the time I was a bit like, I'm not going to do it, right? And then it's lockdown when I just decided, you know what, I'm going to reach out, and you mentored me for 6 months through the darkest days of lockdown, and I just learned that was where my fascination with kind of the functional health aspect came. And since then, like you said, right, you've coached my mum, you helped Katie during pregnancy, you kind of helped me to build a protocol out for Katie, and then we can all see the kind of result of that in Elias. Like, he's like a flipping superhuman baby. So Jake helped me to put together like a health program for Katie during her pregnancy. And then I joined the institute, right? And in fact, before that, I don't know if you remember this at all, you actually, and this was really what got me into the blood work side of things, I hit that stage of burnout where I was literally out of work for about 6 months. I went on holiday about 7 times to try and get myself back. And then I had a call with you, and you built out a protocol for me. I don't know if you even remember that.
Yeah.
And within about 4 weeks, I think I was kind of back, feeling like myself again. And then after that, I was like, I have to do this, right? And then I basically just decided, I'm going to go for it. And it was only a few months after that I joined the institute. So Jake, to put it really, really short, has helped me across many, many years, to get to where I am today, and kind of, point me in the right direction. So from your side, Jake, you're going to do a far better job of introducing yourself and what you do than I will. So tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do, and your path.
Yeah, well, first of all, Dom, it's pretty fascinating thinking back how much ground has been covered in a relatively small amount of time. We're talking about like 2 to 3 years, and how much both of our lives have completely changed. So I think that's a nice little reflection point when you get these moments to think about how much growth has happened. And equally, in between the growth, that's the thing, what everyone sees, the growth, right? But there's also personal challenges and stuff what everyone goes through. But to celebrate that and recognize that, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you. So in regards to who I am, I'm Jake Carter. And I guess I'm a little bit different to most people. I could do the short version or the long version. The short version is I basically teach functional health, functional medicine, blood work business to health professionals. We help them move online as well. And, we've educated students in 39 countries. I physically teach in 11. And I've been doing this for half my life now in this health industry. Yeah. Health and fitness industry.
How old are you?
That's the short version. I'm 30.
30. It's crazy. Same age as I am.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay.
I guess the longer version, slightly longer version is I got into this when I was at the age of 15,
Hmm.
working illegally in a gym, getting paid £3.60 for an hour, because I was training there. And like any young lad, you go to the gym for one reason, well, most young lads, should I say, and that's to get the chicks. So I was training and I was loving it. I was in the gym all the time. And because I was in the gym all the time, I was picking up a few things. And they basically said, hey, Jake, you know, do you want to work here? I shouldn't really be saying this, but they also said, like, do you also want to, you know, be a fitness trainer? The thing is, you're going to have to be a lifeguard at the same time. I was like, I don't know any lifeguard stuff. And like, don't worry, if there's a problem, just run to us. So there was that. And that basically then led me on to becoming a personal trainer at the age of 16. I got injured, fell onto the path of nutrition, learned more about nutrition, got injured again, realized nutrition's kind of saving my ass because it's the only thing I could control when I was injured. And then that enabled me to teach nationally by the age of 18, internationally by the age of 22, 23, globally by the age of 25. I've shared the stage with some of the world's best doctors, in my opinion, by the age of 27. And yeah, we've won some awards on the way, being published in a few media publications and stuff, and done some cool stuff, and had a great time being able to help people get better results.
Unreal, yeah. And just I like to put things into perspective of the kind of work that you do. Like I remember, like even years back, you were coaching like lots of like doctors and medical professionals, and you know, and it just goes to show the level that you've been working at for such a long period of time. You know, that even these kinds of people were coming to you for help, and you must have been 25, 26 at this time when I was seeing it, probably earlier, you know?
Yeah, I've got some funny stories about that actually. I was quite ballsy. I guess I'm a bit ballsy anyway, right? But I really had some big balls when I was younger, and I phoned up this laboratory. I was like, hey, I want to bring functional medicine to the health and fitness industry, and they're like, okay, how fast can you come to Copenhagen? I was like, this week, next week, whatever. And they're like, okay, as soon as you can come. So I got on a plane, flew out, and the owner of the laboratory went to pick me up from the airport in Copenhagen. I was like, you're a bit younger than what I expected. And then he didn't expect me to be in my early 20s. Anyway, I stayed with them. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to spend some time with this private laboratory, learn some stuff. And they kind of took me under the wing. They flew me to Rome to learn DNA and functional neurology and stuff like this. And yeah, there was the discrepancy of what people thought my age was and my real age. So I think that was probably just from having balls and throwing
Yeah.
out some stuff and seeing if it lands, you know?
Yeah, look, yeah, I think like for anyone listening, for all listeners here, I think if you don't, this is the reason why I think people need to pay close attention. And I just wanted to have a little bit of background information on yourself so that people understand, like, you know, where you're at and why this is an important podcast to listen to. And, you know, I think that gives them some good background on that. Now, the topic of today is men's health. So this is what I'm going to call a men's health masterclass. Now, we could probably talk about this for 24 hours because there's that much to kind of think about when it comes to men's health. It's a massive topic, but I want to kind of be quite, I guess, like, you know, succinct in the questions that we ask so we get the most value out of you today, right? So, you know, today's topic is men's health. And now, I want to know from your side, like, what I hope the listener gets from this podcast really is more awareness around what's going on in the world of men's health today, why it's an important topic to understand more about, and, you know, also some action steps that guys can be taking to take more control of this, right? But from your side, why do you feel like this is an important topic to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, number one, when we talk about men's health per se, it isn't just about the hormones and things like that, but it's also about the societal values which are currently being eroded, which is a relatively sensitive topic. Okay, so when we look into men's health, we have, you know, the biology of female and male, and we can see that testosterone is almost like this disappearing hormone in society. We can unpack in a moment or whenever many different reasons as to why and why that's getting worse. But nonetheless, with that testosterone dropping, it's leading to a change in our societal behavior. And that change in societal behaviors then leading to an erosion of responsibility and self-ownership and discipline, which is then allowing our personal and maybe our collective boundaries to be breached because we don't have that resiliency and the integrity to the values of which we once used to have. So when we talk about men's health, I view it at this macro view and think it's not down to the individual in a micro lens in terms of their testosterone, but it's actually how is that impacting the world in terms of what we value, how we function, how we live, and equally the future, what we're paving for ourselves if we carry on the way that we do.
Here's a question on that then.
Yeah, okay.
Do you believe that there is a degree of orchestration behind this? I know this is your kind of, you're going to love this question. Do you believe this is orchestrated in terms of the changes in, you know, firstly, well, I know we're going to get into testosterone, but yeah, go. Yeah.
Straight in at the deep end. Okay. So first of all, like when we look into testosterone, like let's just look at some stats first of all, and then it'll validate what I'm about to discuss further. Okay, yes. The stats are average testosterone levels are declining roughly 1% per year. After the age of 30, they tend to decline 1 to 2% per year. That's due to the decreased Leydig cell function and stuff like this, amongst with senescence and all these different scientific things, which is really relevant. And equally, we can see sperm count dropping by like 59% over the past 40 years alone. So when we just look at those factors in isolation, it's fair to say that it's a bit of a problem, and there's some things which are contributing to that. Now, whenever there's a problem, there is generally a risk versus gain situation, right? Okay. When it's a problem for one person, it could be a benefit for someone else. Mm-hmm. So if we look at, you know, in terms of society, in terms of the way that we live, the lifestyle that's promoted, the things what we consume, the things what we're exposed to, such as endocrine disrupting compounds, BPA, phthalates, yada, yada, yada. All of this is impacting testosterone. And it's not just impacting testosterone, but it's bioaccumulating. So we know that fat cells have an ability to store things like endocrine disrupting compounds, which are compounds and chemicals which can disrupt your endocrine function, your hormonal function, your testosterone production, and they can bioaccumulate. So over a period of time, we get exposed to more and more and more, and we store more and more and more. So that shows that the environment, what we've created, is not aligned with how our body intrinsically needs and wants. Now, as an effect, what is the current modern day solution? TRT. Testosterone replacement therapy. Okay, cool. So when we look into that, if that's the modern day solution, because modern day solutions tend to be more hedonic than eudaimonic, they tend to address the immediate problem rather than address the root cause. If that is the case, who's profitizing from TRT therapy? Well, who makes TRT? A certain industry, the pharmaceutical industry, makes TRT. So one could speculate here, obviously this is just game theory and speculation, but if I was in the pharmaceutical industry and if I was quite high up and I'm thinking, cool, you know, how can I make more money for this? I probably wouldn't want the world to have healthier testosterone levels. Why? Because when there's better testosterone levels, there's lower rates of depression, lower rates of anxiety, lower rates of diabetes, lower rates of obesity, lower rates of Alzheimer's. And when there's higher rates of all of that stuff, there's equally higher rates of medication. So we could speculate that an increased exposure to certain endocrine disrupting compounds, a promotion of certain distorted guidelines, a dysfunctional or inverted lifestyle, a lack of prioritization and value around sleep is all leading to this end result of challenged testosterone levels, which could therefore be extremely profitable for a certain cohort of people. So in answer, yes.
I think you answered my question pretty well. And I like what you said about, you know, I think it's so important to understand what you said quite early on in that about the way that low testosterone is approached. You know, I think obviously people look at testosterone in isolation, don't they? They kind of think, you know, and the medical system doesn't help in terms of how they assess for it. They'll just look at testosterone and they'll say, is it low or is it high? And they won't look at all the other stuff going on behind the scenes when addressing the issue, which is really what the root cause is. Because I always say to clients, people are asking the wrong questions. Like testosterone being low it's a symptom, right? It's not the cause. And so by looking just at testosterone and then just again using TRT, but I also think this spreads into supplementation. Like people come to me and ask me all the time, what supplement do I take for my low
Mm.
testosterone, and it's impossible to say because ultimately that's still not dealing with the root cause, is it? It's you're trying to approach it as as testosterone being the problem, but it's not, right.
Yeah, and this there's a number of cans that open up in my brain. So generally, just for all the listeners which have never heard me speak before, sometimes I get a little bit passionate and I think really faster than what I can speak. So there's probably going to be more stuff than anticipated. So first thing, right? Okay. So many people fall into the trap of treating the marker rather than the mechanism. We have to treat the mechanism, not the marker. Okay. So by taking that approach, it enables us to zoom out, and the symptoms usually the trap, and that way we can take a root cause approach to actually address the reason why that thing's existing. Okay. Another thing is when looking into hormone levels do not equal hormonal effect. So when we look at lab work, we can think, sweet, this hormone level's here, it's all good, right? But the reality is we have to take into account peripheral conversions, we have to take into account binding proteins, we have to take into account receptor sensitivity, we have to take into account metabolites, we have to take into account clearance factors, because all of those can change how well the testosterone levels function. It's like we probably, well, I say we, me and you, we've probably seen people on assistance, anabolic steroids, TRT, the testosterones may be at a certain level, but the symptoms are saying something else. And that's due to issues with receptors and all these other factors. Or we could look into accounts where people have what appears to be relatively sufficient levels of testosterone, but then they have an issue with the enterohepatic circulatory process, and they are actually recycling hormones which have been partly utilized but not fully, and they bind to receptor sites and diminish its activity and function. So there's many different variables. We can't just look at the marker in isolation. So when we take that approach of looking at the marker, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And equally, which is really annoying, I'm getting a bit passionate, obviously, is labs can differ like 10 to 20% or up to 30% with testosterone. So you got like two different types of testing testosterone. You got mass spectrometry. Jesus, my dyslexia is tough. It's like mass spectrometry, and then there's immunoassay, and there's like a 10 to 30% variance sometimes. And it just so happens conventionally, the kind of testing what we get done in terms of bloods is the immunoassay. It's not really as accurate. So there could be a 10 to 30% difference of where that testosterone is sitting. And then there's also the other variables of did they have a good night's sleep the night before? Because that can differ testosterone by 10 to 15%. So you stack those together. Wow. And if we just look at labs alone without asking questions, we can be fucking way off the mark.
Yeah.
Right. And then we look into supplements, and everyone's like getting hard-ons for supplements. Ironically, they're probably looking for supplements for the hard-ons because they're struggling because they have low testosterone in this day and age. But supplements, when you look into the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials, generally they only improve testosterone between 10 and 20%. And for some people, the testosterone is that suppressed due to certain health handbrakes that 10 to 20% lift is going to do fuck all.
Yeah.
So that's why we can't treat the markers. We have to treat the mechanism.
Brilliant. And look, I think that lands us perfectly onto the next question. What are the most common health handbrakes you feel like? You spoke about all these statistics. They're pretty scary when you put them into perspective. You know, there's clearly quite a steep decline across the board in sperm health, sperm count, testosterone and men's health in general, and we can see that. We can see that in all the statistics in terms of men's suicide rates and, mental health issues going on. And obviously, like you said, cardiovascular disease, all these different things, right?
Yeah.
What do you feel like? You've done a lot of blood work. You've obviously looked at a lot of men's blood work.
Just a bit.
Yeah. What are the most important things or most common health handbrakes, as we say, right? That you come up against? Like, why is it so steep, the decline? What's different to 100 years ago? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I've got a few actually what we can hit. This will be really good. Number one, obesity, right? Obesity is becoming far more of a problem, and that's due to us being overfed but undernourished. We live in a sedentary lifestyle. We spend 90% of our times indoors. We see it. It's terrible, right? But how does obesity actually impact testosterone? Well, we know that like some studies, like there's a study on 5 years ago or so, and showed that nearly a quarter, 25% of obese young males had low testosterone levels. And in some cases, it could lower testosterone by 30 to 50%, which is pretty huge.
Mm.
Why and how? That's the main question, right? There's like 7 or 8 different reasons why obesity can lower testosterone. You have aromatase expression, which is one factor. Aromatase is an enzyme produced in fat cells which can convert testosterone through to estrogen. It's actually really good, like for things like menopause for females, maybe not so good for guys, right? So we tend to have a bit of an excess of that. So that's one thing. We also have the fat cells. They secrete things called adapokines, and when they're released from overactive fat cells, they can create Leydig cell failure. The Leydig cells are part of the cells inside the testes, which secrete testosterone. And these adapokines can promote this inflammatory state, and they can equally increase something called ROS, reactive oxygen species, and that can compromise the testicular blood barrier, which is there to protect the testicles, and that's really weak. It doesn't really have a good antioxidant system. So when we have high inflammation or high oxidative stress, the testicular, sorry, the that's a brain, testicular blood barrier, that's the one. When there's high inflammation, that gets compromised. Another one is obesity leads to sleep apnea. That's been correlated to issues with low testosterone, poor vascular dynamics. We've got things like the body fat storing endocrine disrupting compounds. We've got leptin resistance, which can disrupt gonadotropin release and therefore impair things like LH and FSH release. And also obesity can change the prostaglandin ratios, so we can actually push of the essential fatty acid synthesis through to prostaglandin 2, which can again disrupt the testicular blood barrier. So just from obesity alone, there's like 7 or 8 different things which can really challenge testosterone. And then you have things like poor sleep as well, because we know that like a bad night's sleep can drop testosterone between like 10 to 15% in one night situation, but consistently it can drop it by 30. There's gut health, such as leaky gut, systemic inflammation, increased stress. We've got LPS binding protein, and that's got a direct linear fashion to an increase of LPS binding protein and therefore lower testosterone. There's a lack of nutrients like low zinc, which is required for luteinizing hormone production to stimulate the Leydig cells for testosterone. Selenium, vitamin D, that's another one there too, which is absolutely essential. Thyroid hormones are required to maintain the kind of metabolic pace of the body in terms of hormonal production, but also maintaining testicular barrier repair. We've got an increased exposure to BPA, which can create receptor cell dysfunction. And then there's things like air pollution as well, which is quite interesting because men have a higher sensitivity to air pollution. Due to when we have air pollution, we have this hyper responsive cortisol kind of approach to regulate it due to the lung barrier. And when we have this dysregulated inflammation or these exposure to these air pollutants, it's being directly associated to lower testosterone. So when we look into all of those factors, right, poor sleep, dysfunctional way of living, obesity, being undernourished from soil erosion, overfarming, poor food choices, it's kind of understandable why we could have low testosterone.
For sure. And obviously, I always knew the answer to that question was always going to be quite an overwhelming answer, as in terms of I always knew it was going to be like there's a lot of reasons why things are worse, right? But to give the listener, to help remove a little bit of that overwhelm and help them to use that information in a way that can help them to move forward. Obviously weight loss, but obesity, what do? We need to lose weight, right? So that's a simple one. People know how to lose weight, in theory. Sleep better. Okay. Simple. Gut health. I know, my guys will know what to do for gut health. I know a lot of the guys, who are listening will know what to do, but obviously there's a big gray area. We could go into, I'm not going to go into the whole topic of gut health because we could talk again for another set of hours. But what do you feel? I'm thinking more towards like the chemical exposure that we have, the overtoxicity, like you said, the air pollution, which is something that like I knew about, but not to the degree I think I wouldn't put it right up there as on the hierarchy in this hierarchy, but you'll know more than me about that. What can people do? What should people be doing? What should guys be doing in order to take better control,
Yeah, which is a great question and it's so needed. First of all, I think in this industry, there's so many. Am I okay to swear? Like I was just about to swear. Yeah, sweet. I probably swore earlier. There's so many people which just chat so much shit, and they'll say the most ridiculous fucking things, like clickbaity titles because it makes them look cool or it stands out or it's promoting itself on fear, right? Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is there's a lot of people basing their references on like the equivalent of three blind fucking mice, right? So there's clickbait titles, there's weak research, and the reality behind it is just, you know, eating well, moving well, and sleeping well. They're the three fucking core things. Like as fancy as we can get, right? The reality is if you're not fucking moving properly, and I say, you know, the Goldilocks effect, you don't want to overtrain, but you don't want to undertrain, you need the right amount, right? You also need to just not be sedentary. We need to make sure that you're sleeping well. So not just in terms of duration, but quality, continuity, depth, everything else, and consistency. And then we have to make sure you're eating well. And when we say that you have to be eating well, it's like one man's food can be another man's poison. So it isn't just falling into a dogmatic camp or belief system because your favorite Fitspo or influencer is eating a certain way. It's understanding how you should eat based on your body, right? So even though there is simplicity in those three answers, there's complexity behind them. And that's where most people get wrong. And equally, most people shy away because they think they've done the simple things, but they haven't appreciated the depth which is behind them. So, you know, there's the number of things what we can look at. But the reality is, how many clients come to you and they're eating well, they're moving well, and they're sleeping well? They're probably fucking not. Right? They probably got like social jet lag. They're staying up on Friday night and Saturday night, and they're watching Netflix, or they're not consuming enough of a certain nutrient, or they're overeating at certain times. The reality is, it doesn't sound sexy. It isn't viral. It's not fucking cool. But the reality is, those three things, but appreciating the depth behind each column is the biggest answer. What we have to really pay attention to, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I always just reflect back on, I think you're of the same mind. The standards of health. You talk about people, who say I sleep well. The one I always use is I ask people about gut health. How's your gut health? And they say, yeah, great, no problems. And then I say, how often do you bloat? And they say, oh, only a couple of times a day. I'm like, well, that's not great, is it? That's not really what we want to be looking for. But I think it's just a sign of how the standards of health have dropped massively. And like you say about sleep, when you say, how do you sleep? Oh, great. Yeah. Like, how many are you getting? 6 hours. And, do you wake up? Yeah, I wake up quite a lot through the night. The standards have changed massively, right? And even to the point that, like, I've been a health coach, or rather a fitness coach. I wouldn't even regard myself as a health coach until I properly moved into the functional health side of things.
Yeah.
I was a fitness coach for a long time. Thought I was eating well, thought I was doing everything right, but I still hit that burnout, and when obviously you ran my blood work, you could see a lot of holes in what I was doing in terms of, there was a lot of things that needed work in terms of my health. So it goes to show for people who aren't fitness coaches, where does their health land? And I think it's the problem, I believe, and I don't know if you have the same mind, is that the standards have just dropped across the board.
So it's not just like on an individual level, right? Okay. It's like if we look into America, they've actually lowered the reference range, right? Because the upper limit of testosterone was like 1,200 nanograms per milliliter, I believe it was. And then now they've lowered it to 950. So they've actually lowered it by like 20% from the upper level, brought it down because it's basing it on the average state of the population. So even when we look into, digress in a second, just to prove this for a fact, right? It's like if we look into ALT, some labs say the upper limit in America is around 50 for ALT, which is a liver marker. We look into South Korea and it's around 35, right? But what's the difference? Well, we know that there's around 30% more cases of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in America in contrast to South Korea. So they kind of looked at the average and be like, oh, cool, well, the average is slightly higher, let's just change it. So we see that on a twofold approach, right? Because subjectively, individually, we have a suboptimal level of standards because we're not really aware of how good we should feel. And then equally, the benchmark of what we compare and aspire ourselves to is lowering at the same time.
So even if we do improve, we still feel like we're still not where we should really be.
No,
We're
nah,
kind of
exactly.
we're trying to get here, but that's only step one, you know.
It's like a participation fucking medal for your blood
Yeah.
work. That's the same thing, you know?
And I know this for myself because I thought I was healthy when I was a fitness coach, and don't get me wrong, to the standard of what the general population was, I probably was. But the reality was, you know, since that first time I did the blood work with you, I've probably made 20 further steps in regards to my health, and I've just felt better with every step in terms of energy, you know, in terms of cognition, mental health, everything, you know. And I still feel like I still speak to people on these podcasts. I still read stuff where I just think, flipping heck, I'm not even 50% of the way there. Do you know what I mean? It's like an endless journey, right?
I would say something in contrast to that though.
Go on.
There is a cohort of individuals, like let's just call them biohackers, right?
Yeah. And
they are almost distracting themselves from their purpose. They spend so much time in the nitty gritty trying to shift the 1% or 0.1%. And it's like their morning routine's more fucking complicated than the human genome, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, what do they get done with the day? Well, there's so much fannying about with, oh, my HRV wasn't this, or I didn't sleep well. So they try to do all these things to lift it up. It's like, just fucking experience a bit of blood, get punched in the face, crack on with the fucking day. You know, like there's an element of grit and resilience, which equally has to go in tandem with health optimization. What I'm generally seeing in this health industry, right, is due to this loss of resiliency, grit, ownership, and discipline, they're almost outsourcing their responsibility to biohacking. It's like, I don't feel well because of this. And they've always got a fucking problem or an excuse or a reason or something else to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, fuck me. Like, just crack on with it.
Yeah.
You know, like coming from someone in the health industry, right? It's kind of like, you wouldn't expect me to say it's paradoxical, but I genuinely have been in the health and fitness industry and the health and wellness industry. And the health and fitness industry is great for grit, terrible for health and longevity. The health and wellness industry is terrible for grit, but great for like wellness. It needs to fucking meet each other in the middle.
A bit of both. Yeah, 100%. Especially for men, right? You know, we need, I think, you know, you've got men. I guess this is becoming more and more divided as we kind of progress with the problems you're talking about with low T levels and stuff. But you've got men who have got grit, but then they don't take the other side of it with it. And then you've got, you know, men that are becoming more and more, or rather less and less, you know, having less and less grit and, you know, that kind of energy, but more and more so leaning towards, you know, I don't want to say like I mean, we could get into a whole discussion on the masculine, feminine, you know, side of things and what's the changes that are going on in regards to men on that level. And now that's a can of worms, right? So maybe we should leave.
It is a can of worms. I'm happy going there, but I don't know.
I don't know if we got the time, or you know, I don't know if we get you shut down.
I think that's probably the latter one.
Yeah.
But
So look, I do have a question for you. Like, I want to know about, because I think this is so important. One thing I come up against is people talk about like issues with mental health, guys, but they kind of view mental health as separate from physical health, right? They don't see, they just kind of, you know, guys can be struggling for motivation, you know, with depression and anxiety, but how is that related to men's physiological health? Like what role does physiological health play in men's mental health, and also vice versa?
Yeah, this is great. Okay. So we know that our physiology is a product from a psychology, our psychology is a product from a physiology, right? Okay, so it's bidirectional. Some cool studies, right? There's one study which looks into sports and physical challenges and stuff like this, and it found that there was an increase in testosterone levels in men when they play these kind of like physical sports, these manly activities, so to speak. And they also found that winning a competition significantly boosts testosterone. So as a default, we can see that there is this kind of association there. There's another study which looked into like risk-taking behaviors and find that when men were administered testosterone, they had a higher propensity to take risks, suggesting a link between high testosterone levels and behaviors associated with possibly like bravery and stuff like this. And then there's another one, again, we all know exercise, right? It's like sometimes we need, you look at people with like andropause and they just stop moving as much and they just become more and more sedentary. And then when people go on TRT, they're suddenly more active, right? But we equally know when you start resistance training and strength training, that can lead to acute rises in testosterone levels. Or there's even studies done in like social interactions and where people have an opportunity to have like what's classed as social status, that can actually drive testosterone up levels slightly too. Or when they interact with women, what they think are attractive, which is really, really interesting. So when we look into, you know, the biological aspects of testosterone, it's almost like engineered for two things, right? It's protection and procreation, right? Yeah. So when we indulge in protection or procreation, it kind of has this feedback loop. Now there is a flip to this, right? Which is really, really cool. There was one study and it looked into fatherhood, and it actually found that when men become fathers, the testosterone levels drop slightly. Now, there's many different reasons for this, right? It could be that the sleep's terrible, there's increased stress, there's more financial pressure, or from a kind of esoteric kind of perspective, it's almost as if the male figure then has to kind of like move into this nurturing component to raise a family unit and protect them. So, you know, it's probably all answers when we look at both sides of the fence. But nonetheless, when we look into the whole physiology, psychology perspective, it is certainly bidirectional. We can see certain things, what we do, which affect our psychology, affect our biology, and our biology affects our psychology. We also know that low testosterone levels are linked to anxiety, depression, and all these other things, you know? So it's fucking essential to look at both in a nutshell.
I want to ask you about because we spoke about the health side of stuff. What can we do from a health perspective? You know, gut health, sleep, weight loss, you know. But in terms, and I want to ask you about the kind of like, what can we do from a psychological standpoint to set us up? Because, you know, as you've just said there, like almost how we behave is going to affect our testosterone levels. What the environment we put ourselves in is going to affect our own testosterone levels and health in general, right? I actually saw, there's a TED Talk I listened to years ago, which I'll never forget because it was absolutely fascinating. You may have some studies on this topic, but it was insane. It basically showed how they got like thousands of men, right? And they basically got them to go and stand in a room and take certain posture positions. So
Amy Cuddy.
Just stand in certain positions, right? Have you seen this, right?
Her name's Amy Cuddy. Yeah, yes, I think it is. The warrior pose, yeah.
And so you'll know this. You explain this to us. So
so if sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
If you were talking about what I believe is to be referenced to Amy Cuddy, it shows that our appearance can influence our biology, right? So when we think about sitting desk syndrome, you know, practice makes permanent, not perfect. We spend the majority of our time at work and in bed. And most people work at desks this day and age, and that leads to this kind of dysfunctional forward head posture, this internally rotated kind of shoulders. And this position here is not strong, it's not confident. But yet when we change it biomechanically, we can increase our oxygen intake, we increase our physical appearance, we're taking up more space. We're actually exposing ourselves from a kind of anthropological perspective. We're exposing our vital organs when we're chest up, erect, and like standing up strong, and it's a sign of confidence. It's a sign of like, fucking come at me, you know? So there is that element, which is kind of this kind of reassuring, revalidating internal change with physiology and testosterone. But equally, when we're like this and we're internally rotated, cortisol increases, testosterone drops, we don't breathe as well, there's more inflammation, and we just look fucking weak, and we are weak, you know? So I believe it's Amy Cuddy.
That's exactly what I was saying. So it was basically, she was talking about, I can't remember the number. They got a lot of guys anyway to go and stand in a room and take up very specific positions, like you mentioned. Some of them were kind of keeled over, you know, in like, you know, closed off positions. And some of them were stood, you know, hands on the hips, tall as you can. And the physiological expression of that in terms of how the hormones change was crazy. Like testosterone would raise under the kind of chest up position. And look, I'm not even telling people who are listening that you need to go and think about this every day, you know, although funnily enough, I actually did this. I was very unconfident when I was young, very, very, very unconfident. And I remember I used to kind of deliberately walk tall, and, you know, it makes you feel more confident just by forcing yourself into that physical position. But I just wanted to kind of talk about this because it just shows how much is at play here when it comes to influencing our hormones from a behavioral standpoint. You know, there's so much at play. And that leads me onto the question I wanted to ask, which is essentially like, we've spoken about the health, we've spoken about the physical stuff. What can we do? What should we be doing as men in order to, you know, be our best self, you know, like have that get up and go, raise our testosterone levels? What should we set our environment up like? What are the kind of main foundations we need to have in place?
This is a big one. So I'll explain a cop out. Yeah. Okay. And then I'll do my best to answer it from the other side anyway. Now, personally, I'm of the belief, right? Okay. Coming from like, a holistic mind. When I say the word holistic, I don't mean I'm a hippie, goes barefoot, taking acid. I do that anyway, yes. But I also appreciate everything else.
I was going to
say. You know, when we look at this holistic model, we have to recognize, first of all, that there isn't a standardized model, right? Okay. Because for something to be standardized, it has to be generalizable to the entire population. And that means it isn't individualized. It's not specific. It's not personalized, right? Okay. So in essence of that respect, there isn't really a kind of one size fits all. You must do this over that, because we all have these inherent tendencies to possibly gravitate towards certain things and maybe have more resiliency or tolerance to other aspects there too. It all comes into seeking to understand before being understood, and that whole ethos of it's more important to understand the client than the problem the client has. So when we recognize that, you know, there's going to be big rocks for certain people, which this would prioritize over other things. That being said, okay, which is a fucking entire cop out, and that's my philosophy, I'll still try to answer it disregarding my personal belief system. If we just re-engineer the question in terms of what should men do to optimize their testosterone, is that fundamentally the question?
I guess the question was, if we think testosterone, if we know that testosterone, when we have healthy levels, that's just almost like it's a symptom that it's a sign that we are in, at least. And I'm not saying it's a perfect sign, but it's going to help us to live a healthier life, right? Testosterone is going to help 100%. Us also, as you've mentioned, it's going to help us with the energy, the get up and go, and almost to be chasing things, you know, to be hunting in the modern world, however that looks, right? It's going to help us to have the mindset to go and get what we want out of life, right? But how do we set ourselves, if we know that, you know, there's many different behavioral things at play? Testosterone isn't even real. Testosterone is almost just part of the mechanism that helps us to achieve this kind of, you know, get up and go, this kind of ambition, what I believe we should be having as men, right? But I want to know, like, in terms of how do we set ourselves up in terms of our environment, in terms of the people we surround ourselves with, in terms of goals, what do we do? You know, for people who are just feel like they're lacking guys who are lacking purpose, so they're struggling with that get up and go. They haven't really got, you know, a great deal that excites them. How do we set ourselves up physiologically and psychologically to get this changed and, you know, create more for ourselves?
Yeah, I think this is a really fucking good question, right? And it's deeper than what we'd probably anticipate. Irrespective of building the environment around us or the people what we accept in and around our lifestyle, the core root of that is self-worth. That the core root of it, like for me, I'm not going to tolerate living in an area which isn't within a minute or two's walk from the beach, right? That's just my personal values. Like, I'm not going to tolerate eating unhealthy food. It's my personal values. And I think all of this, I say again, it's like people which do not emulate attributes or behaviors that I want to adopt or I would feel ashamed if my fucking future son saw
Yeah.
isn't going to be around me, right? That's my level of self-worth. And
Mm.
it comes from integrity and boundaries.
Yeah.
So by recognizing who you are and then valuing who you are enables you to create boundaries and have integrity and hunt down what you fucking deserve. That's
Mm.
fundamentally the deep answer there. And that will enable you to create a lifestyle, create an environment which is conducive of your future self. It just
Mm.
so happens that so many people are disassociated, they're disembodied because they're so addicted to things like social media and fucking movies and all this and all that, and living in like being in an intoxicated world, sucking on fucking vapes like the dummies. Like they have no emotional regulation and they have no they have no sense of self-awareness. I think it
Mm.
fucking starts with that. Like, that's the crux. If they could be more self-aware and have better emotional regulation, then they'll be able to improve the self-worth, then they'll have more integrity, more boundaries, and they'll be able to create an environment which is actually something they're fucking going to be proud of for not only themselves, but their kids and their grandkids.
Amazing. Where do we start? Where do we start with
Yeah.
all of this?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like we got again in my head, there's two answers, right? Okay. I guess if we break this down, like where do we start? I think one important thing is to look at what's creating the issues. What's creating the issues when it comes to self-worth? Because we can't get dry in the shower, right? So if someone's still leaning into these addictive tendencies, these hedonic pleasures, if they don't understand their values and stuff like this is the problem. Like there's things we could do to accelerate that growth, but fundamentally it comes with having a little bit of an audit in your environment and thinking, cool, is this a lifestyle, a behavior that you want to invest your time with? A great book, a really fucking good book is Die with Zero, okay, by I think it's Barry Perkins or something along the lines of this. And it deconstructs our perception around what retirement actually is, and it gives us the matrix of how we can gauge the value of experiences. When you go through that, you realize how finite time is. And by recognizing how finite time is, it will then enable you to spend your time more wisely. I think that could be a great start, just to enable people to recognize, how am I investing my time in certain behaviors? Is this conducive for the future that I want to live? And recognizing that is probably going to get a lot fucking harder. Like right now, how we have it in terms of access to health, affordability, and all these things, it's probably going to be harder in 10 years' time. Health right now is expensive. In the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a fucking luxury, right? So if we recognize this, now is the best time to get ahead. And understanding that scarcity of time and the urgency to create amends, I think that's where people start. Because there's always going to be the dangling carrot, but most people respond to setting a fire underneath their feet and helping them fucking run faster. And I think that's what people need to do.
100%.
People need to realize that death's fucking coming and you're going to have to make an amends somewhere and experience and look forward to the other side of whatever may be. But make the most of this moment and don't just sit on your fucking phone and watch movies and do bullshit stuff.
Yes, I love that. And look, I'm going to conclude with a final question for you in a second, but I just want to recap or emphasize one of the points you made there, which is the self-awareness is really the answer, right? Self-awareness, obviously, you then have to take action off that. You can't just have awareness. But I personally see, and I know you've kind of already said this, is people are just kind of pulled through life. They just kind of fill their time and fill every second of their time with anything, eating, even listening to podcasts, even what most people would regard as positive things. People just fill their space, which gives them no opportunity to self-reflect and assess themselves and have that audit on, are you actually doing the things that are going to better serve your life, or are you just kind of filling time? There's nothing wrong with, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with entertainment and having a bit of time to watch telly and all this stuff. However, when your life is just sleep, work, entertainment, just fill the time with anything, you're always going to struggle, right? You're always going to struggle to make any forward movement because you're not reflecting, you have no self-awareness, and life will just kind of pull you into the next thing and into the next thing, and you'll ultimately have no control, right?
Yeah. I got something to I want to share with you, man, just on this. Like it's really fucking important. Me being me, I worked out roughly how many ancestors we've had over the past 2024 years. Right, okay. And the number is absolutely ridiculous when you look at it. I'm trying to pull it up here. If I can't pull it up in the next 10 seconds, I'll move on. But fundamentally, if we think about this, if we think about all of your ancestors that have gone through pillage, they've gone through war, they've gone through famine, they've gone through struggles and challenges to be where you are today. And most people aren't grateful for that. And most people just throw that fucking opportunity away. Like if you think about it's a force multiplier of how many ancestors you've had, which have done the worst shit. They've been through the worst cases. For us to be sitting on this kind of metaphorical fucking throne and still be complaining about it, it's
Oh, wow.
disrespectful to your fucking ancestors. So when people start to take that into account, maybe they start to hopefully realize, there's a slightly different way to live.
For sure. For sure. Listen, I want to ask you a kind of final question, and then I'll kind of get you to give me a little summary. I know I'll enjoy that anyway. So let's say nothing changes from here in terms of men's health. We continue on the same trajectory that we're on. Where do you, and as at an individual level, because that's what it's
Yeah.
really about. Because that's where we start, right? We can't start by, changing the medical system or changing the government and all that. We have to start with ourselves, right? They're not going to help us. So it all starts with ourselves. But let's say we don't take responsibility for our own actions. We continue on the same trajectory as an individual, but also as a whole. Where do you see men's health in the next 50 years?
I mean, there's some studies showing that in the next 50 years, we're not going to be able to naturally procreate.
Yeah.
So, when we look at that in isolation, men's health is going to be reliant on intervention, synthetic intervention for sustained survival. I mean, that's where it's going to be, right? But what could we do about that? Like right now, here today, it's appreciating the what I personally class as like the 10 pillars of health. And that's just the natural ancestral ways that we've designed and evolved to function without the glorification of these fucking screens, wires, and supplements and all this stuff, But yeah, I think over the next 50 years, that's the direction it's moving in. It's reliant on synthetic support from testosterone being TRT, from certain fertility implantation kind of methods due to reduced sperm levels. It's just a reliance on that system based on the level of trajectory of what we have. So in contrast to that's where we're going, what is the antagonist to a synthetic world? Well, it's the ancestral natural world. It's just the primitive natural free things that we're gifted with the world, such as walking, moving, breathing, eating, thinking, doing all these simple things. That's the antagonist. That's the enemy of the synthetic creation. And that's something what we should probably lean into more. Now, in the flip switch of this, I would really love to see this being a bit of a pendulum effect. And I recognize sometimes we have to experience the pain and the dirt to appreciate something which we once had and now is lost for us to drive back to the other side. And we see this throughout history as well, right? There's that whole great times create weak men, so on and so forth. You get the gist.
Yeah.
So I think the pendulum effect could be at play, and I hope it is. But whether or not that's going to be in our lifetime, I don't know.
And so if you were to rule the world and you could make one decision for the future of men's health, just one decision,
Yeah, right.
What would you change?
Incorporate a rite of passage where everyone has to do plant medicine.
I love this. And again, we should probably bring. I want to bring you back on to talk about that maybe on another day. But
I
without
think that would solve a lot of things. If I could
I
do
think
one
you
thing,
know what, and
that'd be good.
That sounds crazy, but actually, that would probably change the world all on its own, right?
if you think about this, right, a lot of rite of passages, that there was some kind of level of like survivalism which they had to go through, either from an out of body experience or equally just trials and tribulations and just, slaying a beast or sustaining in the desert or whatever that may have been.
Mm.
And we've lost that because we're living in a society filled with comfort. But what is a way that we could quickly introduce that and still have a relative element of safety and control measures? Yeah, integrating some deep fucking plant medicine at a certain age as a rite of passage for men. It would
What
create
age?
ego dissolution and abolishment of certain behaviors, addictiveness.
Yeah,
Just be good.
100%. What age?
Yeah.
What age would you make that?
Look, so this would be irresponsible of me to now prescribe an age.
Hey, we're just talking here. There's no,
But
you're not ruling the world yet.
yeah. Not yet. But look, I mean, like speaking from personal experience, I've been doing plant medicine half my life too. So, I don't think younger the better. I don't think that. But I think if society is accepting that we can go out and get drunk at the age of 18, why not also have that as an opportunity for plant medicine there too?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But look, let's conclude. I guess I wouldn't mind getting a little summary of you. I know we've probably can't covered all this. Just to kind of conclude today's talk, which I've massively enjoyed. Why do you believe, and I don't even know if I've asked you this already, why do you believe like all the information that you've shared today is important for the listener to not only be aware about, but also actually to take some action off the back of?
Because not many people say it as blunt as me. Yeah, that's the thing. So I'll come from a factual evidence-based background, which appreciates and respects both sides of the fence and thinks about things from a very holistic mind, but a scientific approach, whilst equally being a blunt fuck, which doesn't mind hurting people's feelings. So that might be enough for people to realize the depth, the value, and the urgency to implement some of this stuff.
Yeah, well, amazing. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I just want to say for everyone listening that, I've known Jake for probably over 4 years, coming up on 5 years now. And
yeah, it's a while.
I have to listen with real intent sometimes to keep up with Jake's mind on some topics, and even then I still don't quite manage it. But, today, the information, if you listen to this and re-listen to it, you'll find a wealth of knowledge inside everything that Jake shared with us today. So we are truly blessed to have had you on, Jake. I massively appreciate it. And I hope we can also do this again sometime and talk about something else, which I know we could talk about 1,000,001 other topics, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love the topics. I love the curveballs. And I really do respect and appreciate you do the stuff, what you've been doing and the growth, what you had and the results, what you get. And you simply just doing this podcast. It's fucking awesome to see. So, kudos to you. Thank you.
Amazing. I appreciate that. Well, look, guys, thank you for listening. Thanks again, Jake. And we shall leave you with that.